So now that you have decided to write a children's story, let's talk about how you actually get your passion to your ideas to the paper to the bookshelves. Okay. We want to talk today about turning your passion into compelling stories. Okay. It's one thing to have a passion, something you love to do, something that drives you, the thing that wakes you up in the morning. It's another thing to write a story about it, right? When I first started writing, I often would get stuck and I'd be like, oh, what exactly is it I want to say, right? And so I had a professor once who told me, start with what you love, start with your passion. What are your passions? And so I went down this list of like things that I was really passionate about. I'm passionate about my family. I'm passionate about education. I'm passionate about my friends. I'm passionate about playing tennis. I am passionate about reading stories. I'm passionate about helping others write. So I decided to write a story that encompassed all these things, right? And I'm not saying don't include all of your passions in one story. You can try and do that. But you can just touch on one, right? One of your passions. So, um, Zora the Storykeeper, when I wrote this story, you'll notice when you read through, there's the main character, she likes stories. She likes acting out stories with her family members. She likes learning about her family members. She is passionate about collecting stories from other people about her family members. She likes playing tennis. So you'll see not only actual images of my family members and of the illustrator Dare, her family members as well. You'll see elements of our passions kind of sporadically throughout the story. And sometimes we make the assumption that all authors are all writers are just creating these fictionalized stories that have no elements of truth, and that's not necessarily the case. So you can start with what you're passionate about. You may be passionate about a sporting event. It's a great time to get some um, uh, details about the Olympics, the sporting events that are being documented in the Olympics. You can write stories about little girls and boys who are wanting to pursue a sport or learning a sport or watching their favorite athlete on television right now or in Paris right now. So there's lots of things that we can write about, especially if you're writing for children. What do children care about? What do children love? What passion of yours would you love to share with next generations? What passion would you love to teach a classroom full of children about? That's where your story lies. When you start with your passion, it's not only something that you know really, really well, it's also near and dear to your heart. It also helps you connect with your readers. So as adults, we have a huge age gap. There's a huge knowledge gap. There is a huge interest gap when you're working with young children. But when you're writing stories for young children, you have to find some way to bridge the gap, right? So I also encourage talking to children around you. If you're not a teacher and you still are writing, you may have family members who you can write a story for. You can ask them questions before you start. I used to teach preschool, and of course, we had a lot of picture books in the classroom. I would get feedback from my students on which books they loved, which books they didn't love, what they loved about the books, what they hated about the books, what kind of books they wanted to see on the shelf, what kind of books they were not interested in reading. And so I used all of this knowledge from these 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds about how to structure my stories and which stories to focus on, right? Because we're even though as adults we have passions that our young readers may not have any interest in, we can still pull and get information, right? We can still um, find a way to tailor our story so that our readers will be interested. So start with what you're passionate about. Okay, so tip number 1, we're going to identify our passions. Tip number 1, reflect on your interests. So what activities are you currently involved in? What activities, how do you spend your day? or what topics excite you most, okay? So identify, start there, reflect on your interests. What do you like to do? What are you interested in? Chances are, if you're interested in, let's say, gardening, I just started an indoor garden. I'm gonna write a story about a little girl who starts an indoor garden. But chances are, if you have an interest, there's at least one other person on the planet who has the same interest, right? I have found communities online, communities of people who are gardening. Some have indoor gardens, some have acres and acres of land where they have, gardens. And I'm just learning so much. It's a new interest, but I also happen to be a writer. I happen to write stories for children, right? So as I'm learning this new interest, this new hobby, I'm taking note of, I wonder if I could add this in a children's story. I wonder if my young readers would be interested in learning about this as well, right? So start jotting down some notes about what interests you, okay? What do you love to talk about? That's another thing. I love to tell people that I have this indoor garden, and it's nothing fancy yet. There's a lot of green here. There's a lot of budding. There's a lot of soil, and I have grow lamps. I have plants as well as herbs, and so I'm super excited about it, and I love to tell people about what I'm doing. So take notes on your interests. Take a mental note of what you think young readers would love to hear or to learn or to read in your story. And then what do you love to talk about? That's where you start the place of the story, right? Like, what's the exciting part of this new hobby or this interest of yours? That's tip number one. So reflect on your interests. Tip number two, explore your values. What matters most to you in life? I think the part about gardening that I love right now is just learning something new. I love learning something new. So what do you love? Like, what matters most to you? I love learning about something new, and I love sharing it, right? I share, when I'm talking to my friends and family, and I also love writing about it. I love writing stories for children. I love sharing. I'm going to write a story that teaches a story about a little girl who's learning how to grow a garden, right? Because I think some young reader are going to be like, oh, that's really cool. I could do that too. So what matters most to you? And then what do you believe in? So what matters most? What do you believe in? So that's tip two, explore your values. Tip three, consider your experiences. What life events have shaped you? And then what stories do you long to tell? Okay. Um, I'd like to say start a story by pretend as if you were talking to a friend and you're setting the scene like, girl, listen, this is what happened today, right? Or let me tell you the story, sis, sit down. You want to hear this, right? That's where you want to start a story. Start at the exciting part. Add as many details in as you possibly can. And then fill in the gaps as you're telling this story, right? As you're telling and writing is a little bit different, right? But you can start by telling the story and then filling in the gaps. So find where your passion lies, create and reflect on your interests, explore your values, and consider your experiences with those passions. Okay. How do we transform those passions into stories, though? Find the heart of your passion. So what's the core emotion or message? So pretend that you're talking to that friend. What's the heart of that message? What's the aha or girl or you have to hear this? What's the aha moment in that story? And then who are the characters? Who are the characters that are there? So you have to create some engaging characters. So you have the story that you want to tell. Who is involved? Who's around? What happened to them? What do they look like? What do they sound like? You have to create engaging characters to keep the story going, right? So how do we transform our passions into stories? One, find the aha moment, find that core emotion or message that you want to tell, and then create engaging characters. Who was there? What happened? What did they sound like? What did they look like? What did they say? What did they smell like? What did they do? All of those details are really, really important. Okay. And then three, build a compelling plot. okay? You know the story. Have your compelling characters go through something, okay? How do you keep your friend engaged in this story from beginning to end, okay? Um, so we want to start with our passions and we want to turn our passions into compelling stories, all right? Our writing prompt, our writing burst for today is choose one passion and brainstorm a character that embodies that passion. What challenges might this character face? And how can you use your passion to create a compelling story? Okay. So for the next at least 5 minutes, just jot down some notes. Okay. Um, turn your passions into compelling stories. I will see you next time. We're going to talk about finding um, the appropriate audience for our compelling stories.